Hi, I'm Naya. I am doing a feedback video for the Murkmire patch. Gilliam recently spoke to a few of us and said that any video feedback we could provide, which had good feedback, and he explained what good feedback was promptly after, would be appreciated because video feedback was the best. So that is what I'm trying to do. In particular, I'll be addressing the shield changes as well as my favorite Nightblade ability as a Magicka Nightblade, and why I really do not like the change that is coming to it, and why it's not exactly necessary either. Refreshing Path is what I'm speaking about. I have always loved Refreshing Path. That's just kind of been one of my favorite skills. It reminded me of a certain skill on Templar, and on investigation, they're actually really similar in values as well. I have used Refreshing Path before Morrowind. I was using this skill just because I liked being different, because I liked being utilitarian, because I liked being useful. And I have always been able to perform relatively well with it, regardless of, everything else at the time. I was using it before we had this whole cross-healing meta, even though that meta is, that is the meta, but that strategy is not new whatsoever, at all. Nightblades have used Refreshing Path and Funnel in mass before. It's not new. So, more specifically, I have stripped my character down. She has basically nothing on her, except for the Warrior Mundus, but Warrior Mundus does not affect Magicka abilities. So I also went through my CP, and you'll see everything is on, as well as all my skills. Nothing except for this skill right here. Now, just to see the duration, I'm going to get the duration buff here, but that's not a huge issue, so whatever. Now, if we look at the numbers here, we have, 139 damage and 139 healing. Okay, I like that. That's good. That's a good skill. And then now looking at the Templar skill, which very much so resembles this skill. It costs more, but that's because it has a purge to it, so that makes sense. It does more damage and heals for more. So this character was also completely stripped down entirely. I took her CP out, and I took all of her weapons off. You see she has no weapons here. I took all of her clothing off as well. And yeah, I do not see at all why Path has to change when we have Ritual of Retribution for Templars. The change to where Path does not deal damage is completely unnecessary, especially since Path has had its values nerfed a lot. It used to heal for a really nice amount. It was good healing. And in PvE, healing potency within 10%, give or take, does not really matter that much, especially on heal over time effects. If my Path is hitting you for 10% harder healing, that's not drastically different, because in a good PvE environment, you're going to be getting a lot of other heal over time effects, which means your health bar is just going to ramp up faster. You don't have to worry about potency quite as much. But in PvP, a 10 to 5% healing reduction actually matters, because we already have a 50% healing reduction. So this used to be on par with mutagen. It wasn't as good healing as mutagen, nor should it be, might I add, but it was good, and we could feel it. Now it just kind of is there if you end up using it in PvP. I have loved the skill, and I've loved to use it in PvP, but it's hard for me to fit it on my bar right now. Before Somerset, I have always had it on my bar, no question. I played Magicka Nightblade in one of the weirdest ways ever, and it just kind of fit into that. So yeah, why is Path being changed? Can we stop hating on Magic Nightblade, please? Because a lot of the changes that are happening to Magic Nightblade don't always affect PvE in the desired manner while heavily affecting their capabilities in PvP, solo or otherwise. Now, that's out of the way. More specifically now, I want to talk about Healing Ward. This was brought up in the class reps meeting that happened today. Yes, this is the day that I'm filming it. So we have Healing Ward and Ward Ally. Healing Ward got its initial heal removed, and that triggers the hell out of me. I never really used Healing Ward for the heal after a certain period of time. So if we look here, we read the tooltip. When the shield expires, the target is healed for 100% of the shield's remaining strength. Now, in PvE, that doesn't really matter as much because as long as they get shielded and the healers are actually competent, they're getting heal over time effects, so someone's health is going to go back up relatively quickly just because of the ward effect. The ward will help keep them alive. Now, looking at this skill from a PvP perspective, the heal is why a lot of people use this. As a Magicka Nightblade, I have no useful burst heal. Like, Malevolent Offering is just kind of fun to screw around with. The minor mending effect that you get from Healthy Offering is nice and all, but it tends to really be costly in a PvP environment, especially because you're constantly being pressured. You don't have... If you're not in a group or a ball group, you cannot afford to use this skill. Whereas Wardens and Templars can typically afford to use their burst heals. Looking at Restoration Staff, Healing Ward is really necessary for a Magicka Nightblade. Now, Ward Ally solves the issue of people stealing my healing wards, but I need Healing Ward, especially with the changes to Refreshing Path and how much Strife costs now. I have pretty much always disliked the change to the costs of Strife for multiple reasons, and I can get into that later, but it's just less ways for me to regain health as someone who is not a dedicated healer. We should all have a certain amount of dependable self-healing, and Healing Ward gives us that. No one in PvP uses this shield for the heal after it's expired. Most of the time, my Healing Word is gone within like 4 seconds, sometimes less. I have almost never gotten a full duration heal unless my opponent is being an absolute idiot, in which case they deserve to lose and I deserve to go back up to full health. Because if my opponent is just not paying attention at all, they should lose the fight. So yeah, Sorks, can stack shields on top of the Healing Word, and then the Healing Word will heal them back to full. And that's pretty much the only use for that effect. Otherwise, Healing Word is your burst heal. That juicy heal at the start of it is really, really important. If you don't want to have Healing Word be so strong, especially for Sorks who are stacking shields, my suggestion is to remove the healing effect when the shield expires. Because, especially in PvE, if that shield doesn't get popped and that person doesn't get healed for whatever reason, you have 6 seconds, come on people. It's, that little clause is almost entirely useless. The initial heal, though, is really important. It is extraordinarily important. And if we look here, it says the shield's strength is increased up to 300% depending on the severity of the target's wounds. Now, we're going to look here at one of the best executes in the game. I'm going to do Impale because I play Magicka, but right now they're about, what you would expect for someone who has absolutely no stats whatsoever. You look at this and you go, oh, deals 300% more damage to enemies below 25% health, which means this is basically doing the damage to out-damage Healing Word. Most executes scale up to 300% more damage. So if you're worried about people, being too powerful with Impale, or not with Impale, with Healing Ward, you don't need to worry about that quite too much, because executes solve that problem. Now, I don't slot an execute. Half the time, I don't have the bar space for it. And that is a conscious choice that I make, that I deal with, that I sometimes regret, and then I sometimes absolutely do not regret it whatsoever. So, yeah. That one's kind of just left out there up to you guys to figure out, because it does not need its initial heal removed. If anything, it needs that to stay, and you can take off other effects. And the only other effect that would make sense would be when the shield expires, the target is healed for X% of the shield's remaining health. That can go. And that would stop Sorks from being so survivable. It would make them actually, like... It wouldn't just make them stack shield on top of each other until they pop back to full health. It would actually make them try and be a little offensive, because that is how they crit, and that's how they get healing from crit surge. But it would also make them slot things like mutagen. There was a while where I ran Conjured Ward and Annulment in mutagen. I did Sork without Healing Ward. And mutagen would just kind of pop me back up. I had issues against people with executes, though, and that makes sense. But it was just a fun little experiment. So, Healing Ward has now been addressed, and now to wards in general. From the class reps meeting, it was said that you wanted to add the cast time to Annulment and not the Sork shield. That is the complete opposite of what you should do. You have the right idea, though, so congrats on that. I applaud your thinking. If you were to add a cast time to the Sork-specific ward, that would make the Sorks less likely to be shield stacking. So, all of the other Magicka characters in both PvE and PvP still have a viable form of defense. Now, as a Magicka Nightblade, I need Healing Ward. I've already addressed that. But if Healing Ward gets changed the way it is, then I need Annulment to not take a second to cast. Looking at some skills in the game which do overloaded damage would be Snipe. I get sniped, I need to put another... Like, I need to defend myself, so I need to put a ward up immediately, especially with how buggy the CC with Snipe is. Like, oh my god, just make this a real spammable. Take off the cast time, take out the overloaded damage, just make it a real spammable. Same thing with Scattershot. The fact that Scattershot is getting changed to, like, what, 28 meters is really concerning, because one, the CC has always been a bit buggy, but two, you can snipe someone, like cast snipe, and then use Scattershot to hit them with the snipe, like, mid CC, which means just fucking good game. You know, how am I supposed to counterplay that? Also, add in to that the fact that you introduced a new bow, which I think is very interesting, personally. I'm not sure if I like the bow that comes with Black Rose Prison, but it's interesting. And that's not a terrible idea, but it does a bleed, which is really nasty. It's typically agreed upon in the forums, at the very least, if nowhere else, that bleeds are a little too overtuned right now. They're not a huge problem, but this coming next patch they might be. Especially with this whole Scattershot bleed effect that's coming with the Black Rose weapon. So I've addressed that particular issue. Snipe is something that is always complained about, and quite frankly, as much as I would love to delete this skill from the game, Gilliam had a recommendation a while back where we could turn this into an actual spammable, where we remove the cast time and had just, you know, like actual damage. So here, let's go look at Strife. It would be comparable to Strife's damage, you know, as you see now, because this is a completely naked character. It would be an instant cast, it would be, you know, full range, and it would do physical damage. And if anything, if you want, like, you know, oh, that's going to require an art budget, it won't. Well, okay, I'm not going to say that. because I don't make the video game, but it may not. So animation-wise, poison arrow, as someone who is an archer myself and knows of a certain technique called Arab archery, which is very historically friendly, you can pretty easily weave light attacks with poison arrow, and just that action, that motion is very fluid in what it would look like if you were, you know, that would be snipe. No one pulls a bow back the way you pull snipe back and just has it arc all the way to... No one does that. Unless you're aiming, like, a football field away. Probably 2 football fields away with an English longbow. So, yeah, for realism's sake, as well as balance sake, it would be better if this became a spammable, like an actual spammable, not a cast time, and they would have the same sort of motions on the character and animation as Poison Arrow, except since Poison Arrow has, you know, the poison effects, the green trail, and all that, then that would have to be changed. It would have to be, you know, physical damage. Or you could do Lethal Arrow would be changed to almost the same animation as Poison Arrow, with limited kind of makeup added. And as for like Lethal Arrow in general, the Defile, too strong, get rid of it. That's all I'm gonna say. You could do minor Defile maybe. Moving on, there's something that's always kind of bugged me that just hasn't been addressed, and we've mentioned it before, Ancient Knowledge. The fact that this requires a Destro skill for you to get the benefit, whereas no other skill line does that, just pisses everyone off, especially after you added new skills, especially a new spammable, that I sometimes can't really use because you need to have a Destro skill slotted. So yeah, there's that. Please look at that. That's all I'm gonna say. And as much as I like having counterplay to Cloak, I never ever have bar space for Mage Light. Like I cannot afford to fit this on my bar in Cyrodiil. But you know who can? Ball groups and Zerglings. So yeah. Or, you know, people who are stacking max magic and they need Mage Light. And that makes sense. But I can almost never afford to put Mage Light on my bar, or else I'm losing a valuable tool somewhere. So, as much as I love, like, more counterplay to stealth, I'm not sure how to solve this problem. Let me just say that. I'm not sure how to solve this problem. But I feel like something needs to be done where that you can kind of have Mage Light on your bar while not having it on your bar. Maybe adding an Undaunted ultimate, which would give you Overload's third bar, and then you could put Mage Light on that bar, you know, something like that. As for other forms of counters to stealth, I have an issue with Flare, because this costs as much as Strife used to. In fact, this costs less than Strife used to. Not by much, not much less. But this costs less than Strife used to cost. So, yeah. I'm not saying this needs to cost as much as Mage Light, but the fact that you have 51k health tanks running around in ball groups spamming the shit out of this means it should probably be addressed. Especially since no one likes giant ball groups and tanks who only do one thing, spam Caltrops and Flare. Yeah. Also, if you take the correct morph of Flare, it does a lot of flame damage. Like, it does a gargantuan amount of flame damage. Also, something I'd like to see in the future, you know, if we look at our... Where is it? We're gonna unlock this here. So, we have 2k resistance to flame damage. Except as a Breton, I have, like, almost 4k spell resistance, and since spell resistance is the main... or spell damage is the main source of fire. Effectively, Bretons have almost 2 times more fire resistance than Dunmer. What? Can we fix that? Same thing with Nords, too. Nords have the same, or roughly the same value of resistance to ice as Dunmer do? Or not Dunmer. Well, yeah, as Dunmer, the same value Which means Breton is still not taking damage that it probably should? I don't know. Magic damage in general just does not hurt Bretons that much, whereas fire damage hits a Dunmer harder than it hits a Breton. That just does not make sense, and I would appreciate if that was tweaked, especially for those poor Nords, since Nords need... Throw Nord a bone. Oh my gosh. Please throw Nord a bone. Otherwise, that's all I have to cover. Like, that's all I have that what I would say is a pressing matter. As for, like, smaller things, Strife. You thought I was not going to talk about Strife? As this skill has always been presented, it is supposed to be a lower damage, cheaper spammable that will sustain you in between using Assassin's Will. It is not supposed to be a main heavy form of DPS. It's supposed to keep you alive and keep your DPS up, rather than just sitting there and spamming light attacks. It is a filler skill. If ZeniMax wants to change that, I mean, they are totally welcome to do that, because it's their game. But for the love of God, love of the divines, please tell us, so that we know what's going on. Because when I look at the skill right now, I see two things. One, Strife does too much damage, and it costs too much. And with the changes next patch, I'm still seeing that. I'm still seeing that it both does too much damage, and it costs too much. But that can change. Now, the morph of Cripple, Debilitate, I've had some people say that they would like to give this snare removal, which would be like siphon your enemy's spirit, or, you know, you bolster your own whatever to give it, to make you immune or to remove snares for a certain amount of time. Yeah. I'd say, like, what? It would be like DK Wings. Unlike Dragon Knights, I do not believe Magblade needs, or I do not believe Nightblade in general needs a class source of immunity. It does not need immunity. I'm going to say that again. It does not need immunity, but removal would be greatly appreciated. Yeah, there's that. That would actually incentivize people using Debilitate. You know, that would make Debilitate much more useful. And Cripple is still, like, you have that initial hit damage and the Immobilize, which means it's, you know, still hitting harder. But for the moment, I have no reason not to take Cripple. Now, looking at Siphoning Strikes, great sustained skill. It feels a little lackluster, just like, I miss the old Siphoning attack. Of course, for this like iteration of the game, we need to have adjusted values. Rather than restoring almost 1,000 resources per light attack, it would have to be like 200 resources per light attack. But I liked being able to sustain my stamina as well as my magicka. That was very important to me, and it was important to a lot of other Nightblades as well. And then the sap tank playstyle, of course, died out with the change to siphoning attacks. Now, I'd say, in my opinion, Leeching Strikes, we'd have old Leeching Strikes back, except the proc chance of siphoning attacks would go onto Leeching Strikes. So that Leeching Strikes would do, you know, it would give you that resource return for doing sap tanking. Power Drain, I'm happy with the change to Power Extraction. It was weakest AoE skill in the game. Sap Essence is also left behind. I wish I could use this in Cyrodiil more as not a Bomb Blade. I feel like it needs a very small damage increase, not much of one, especially if Power Extraction is going to get one. But I also feel like the healing needs to be increased. The base healing, not the percentage healing. The healing that you get for just hitting... Well, so this is basically a heal in general. Like, I can just sit here and do this. I'm not hitting anyone, but I'm still going to receive healing from sap. It's just increased by a percentage per ability or per enemy or mob you hit. So I would like to increase the base healing done a little bit more. It would just make it feel a lot more useful in places like Cyrodiil. Because this only feels useful if I'm A, bombing, or B, in heavy armor. And I am both not very good, nor do I really like those playstyles too much. Tether, holy crap. Full shred going at siphoning, or soul siphoning is a cool skill. Love it. But tether, the radius on this is garbage. I can never hit anyone with this unless they're standing still. I love tether. I love how this skill looks. Like, just the use of the skill is awesome. But I can never hit anyone with it, ever. And then you look at the radius here, and it's like, what, 8 meters here, right? And spin to win, that ability that every fucking stand build is using, oh my god, is 9 meters. I don't see why tether can't be at least 8 meters, or, I don't know, 7. Just be nice. I have no particular issues with shadow abilities. I mean, having a small cost reduction on this would be nice, but it doesn't need it. This passive here, I would like to kind of talk about, though. It really kind of makes me feel insecure isn't the right word. I have issues dealing like with how many skills I have slotted on what bar, you know, at what time. Rather as if it just gave you a flat like 5% buff. So here, let's upgrade it. So that's 3% for every skill you have slotted, which means I can't just. Well, I typically have 2 abilities on my bar in a PvP scenario, which means I'm getting a 6% bonus. Now, I would prefer it if it was like you could get a 5% max health bonus if you have a siphoning ability, or not siphoning, a shadow ability slotted. I would much prefer that, which is technically a nerf. It's not a huge one, but it really kind of helps just feeling of, oh my god, if I bar swap, I'm going to go into execute range. Because if I have 2 abilities on my front bar, and then I go to my back bar, and then I swap around, I may randomly trigger a Sork execute, and that shit's annoying. No one likes that. No one wants that to happen. Shadow Cloak is... I just like it if it was 3 seconds, like, holy crap, guys, come on, but... whatever, cloak is cloak. And then kind of looking at build strike, you have surprise attack here applies fracture, right? Why can't concealed do that? Melee Magicka Nightblade has consistently been absolutely pummeled into the floor to a point where, why do I play it? And the thing is, I've actually stopped playing it as much as I used to. I still carry the gear for it because I like it and it works well. And, you know, snare removal, but it's a discount stand blade. That's what it is. It's a discount stand blade. So yeah, if this got like even minor fracture or major, not fracture, breach, right? I think so. Anyways, if it got any of those debuffs, that would kind of make Magic Nightblade, or as a melee spec, feel better, because right now I have to use Mark to get that, and it doesn't feel great. And seeing as Cripple is like the change to Cripple Expedition hurt melee more than it did ranged, it's just kind of sad. Overall, that kind of covers most of my changes, or most of my issues with changes, and most of my feedback in general. I would like it if people had more incentive to use Soul Harvest in PvP. Now that in-cap has been addressed, a lot of people are kind of going back to Soul Harvest just because it does more damage for Magic Nightblade, but back when it was undodgeable, it wasn't entirely unbalanced. It was a bug, so it needed to be fixed. However, having it undodgeable was kind of nice. It stopped fights from being totally prolonged against like really bad players who all they did is spam dodge roll back to their Zerg. Right? No one likes that. It doesn't matter like who you are. No one likes chasing someone who's at 1% health just to have them go back to their bloody Zerg. That is irritating. And And so Soul Harvest was a great finisher for that. And it wasn't entirely unbalanced. If it was specified like how Fossilize has it, this ability cannot be dodged. That would probably be a good idea. But especially as a ranged Magicka Nightblade, if you look at this from a ranged build's perspective, if I cast Shade here, right, like, I am a squishy ranged build. I have to risk my ass going in and then using Soul Harvest, which may not even land. And then I have to either get out by using Shade, which is sometimes in range and then sometimes not in range. That also means I have to get close to my enemy. If I am dueling a Magicka Dragonite, for instance, that means, you know, I have to get close to my Magicka Dragonite opponent, which is what they want. Most of the time, people use Shade and Cripple to kite around. I don't really like that playstyle, but I absolutely cannot deny that it is effective as hell. Kind of too effective, if you ask me. Yeah. So, can we not have that dodgeable? I don't know. That's just me. That kind of concludes it for this video. Just overall, thanks for your time.